When my daughter got married, I stayed silent about the $75 million I inherited from my late husband. Thank goodness I did. Because days later, her husband showed up with a lawyer at my door. I, Eleonora Vanderbilt, at 72 years old, was a creature of habit and quiet contemplation. My world, for the past year and a half, had shrunk to the comfortable confines of my small, albeit meticulously kept, Victorian house on the outskirts of town. It wasn't grand, certainly not befitting a Vanderbilt of old, but it was my sanctuary. A haven filled with the scent of old books, lavender potpourri, and the lingering, almost imperceptible echo of Robert's laughter. Outwardly, I was the quintessential sweet old lady, a silver-haired matriarch prone to knitting and baking lemon tarts. Inwardly, however, a steel trap of a mind lay hidden, honed by years of quiet observation and a lifetime punctuated by unexpected losses and surprising revelations. Robert. My late husband. Even now, his name felt like a sigh on my lips, a ghost in the corners of my heart. He was a man of delightful contradictions, a brilliant, eccentric mind constantly chasing intellectual curiosities, a lover of obscure history, and a master of the unexpected. He'd had a twinkle in his eye that promised adventure and a shadow in his past that hinted at something deeper, something he rarely spoke of. His death had been sudden, a massive heart attack that snatched him away mid-sentence over a chessboard. The shock had nearly crippled me, but I rebuilt, piece by painful piece, accepting the quiet solitude as my new normal. Then came the discovery. 6 months ago, a crisp, official letter arrived, utterly shattering the peace I had painstakingly constructed. Not a will, not a life insurance policy, but an intricate web of offshore accounts, trusts, and investments, meticulously managed, incredibly diverse, and utterly secret, all totaling a staggering $75 million. Robert, my quiet, history-loving Robert, had been a financial titan in a world I knew nothing about. The news hit me like a physical blow, a bewildering mix of grief, betrayal, and awe. He had kept this immense fortune hidden from me, his wife of 50 years. Why? The question gnawed at me. But as the shock subsided, a new, more pressing instinct emerged. I would keep this secret too. It wasn't greed. Not for me anyway. What did I need with such wealth at my age? My little house, my garden, my books. They were enough. No, it was an inexplicable, visceral sense of protection. Protection from? I wasn't entirely sure. From the world, perhaps, which felt increasingly predatory since Robert's departure. And, if I were truly honest with myself, protection for Lydia. Lydia, my only daughter. 45 years old, vibrant, intelligent, but always a little too naive. Too trusting. She had a heart of gold, but a radar for trouble that was perpetually malfunctioning. Throughout her life, she had a knack for attracting people who saw her generosity as an opportunity, her optimism as weakness. There was a part of me that had always worried about her, a mother's primal fear for her vulnerable offspring. I couldn't shake the feeling that such a vast sum of money would not be a blessing for her, but a curse. Not yet, anyway. Not with what I was beginning to suspect about her new fiancé. Mark. Lydia's new husband, as of last Saturday. He was a man with a smile that could charm the birds from the trees and eyes that held a flicker of something calculating. He was younger than Lydia, perhaps 40, with a polished demeanor and an almost unnerving self-assurance. He worked in real estate development, a phrase that always sounded just a touch too vague to my old-fashioned ears. Lydia was head over heels, glowing with a happiness I hadn't seen in her for years. And I wanted that happiness for her desperately. But beneath my polite smiles and maternal nods, a low hum of anxiety vibrated in my chest. A silent alarm bell that only I could hear. He was too perfect. Too attentive, too solicitous, especially towards me. His compliments felt practiced, his interest in our family history a little too keen. I'd seen it before, this glint in the eye of men who saw opportunity where others saw love. Robert's secret inheritance solidified my resolve. For now, the money would remain my secret. A silent shield, held aloft just in case. I told myself it was for Lydia's good. That she needed to find happiness on her own terms, not on a foundation of inherited wealth. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. It was an instinct, raw and ancient, telling me to guard my treasure, not just the money, but the peace and quiet of my twilight years, from a storm I felt brewing on the horizon. The wedding had been beautiful, a blur of white lace and champagne toasts, but all the while, my gaze kept returning to Mark, to the way his eyes lingered on the details of my modest home, to the almost imperceptible tensing of his jaw when he thought no one was watching. The quiet life I had so carefully cultivated felt suddenly fragile, perched precariously on the edge of an unseen precipice. I just didn't know how quickly I would be pushed. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and champagne, a heady mix that usually evoked joy, but for me, Eleonora, it was tinged with a faint, metallic tang of unease. Lydia looked radiant in her ivory gown, her face alight with a happiness that warmed even my cautious heart. She deserved this, I thought, watching her glide down the aisle on Mark's arm, her hand nestled in his. But my eyes kept returning to him, to the subtle nuances of his posture, the almost imperceptible shifts in his expression. He was undeniably handsome, with a confident bearing and a smile that seemed perpetually plastered in place. A good-looking man, articulate, charming, all the things a mother supposedly dreams of for her daughter. Yet, my instincts, sharpened by 72 years of observing human nature, screamed a silent warning. His smile, though broad and frequent, rarely reached his eyes. There was a practiced quality to his gestures, a theatricality that felt hollow, like a meticulously crafted facade. I sat through the ceremony, a polite, demure mother of the bride, exchanging pleasantries with distant relatives and Lydia's colleagues, all the while a frantic internal monologue played out in my mind. $75 million. The weight of that secret pressed down on me like a physical burden. Was I doing the right thing, keeping it from Lydia? My daughter, whom I loved more than life itself. The justifications I had built for myself resurfaced. Lydia's past indiscretions, her tendency to see the best in everyone, even when the worst was staring her in the face. She had been burned before, financially and emotionally. A large inheritance, particularly one acquired in such an unexpected and clandestine manner, would be a magnet for trouble. And Mark, with his too bright smile and too sharp eyes, felt like trouble personified. During the reception, as the band played a cheerful jazz tune and guests mingled, Mark made a point of coming over to my table. He bent down, his voice a smooth purr, his hand lightly resting on my shoulder. "Eleonora, you look absolutely stunning today. And Lydia, well, she's never looked happier. Thank you for raising such a wonderful woman." His words were perfect, textbook son-in-law charm. But his eyes, as they swept across the modest pearl necklace I wore, then over my simple silk dress, lingered for a fraction too long. "This house," he continued, straightening up slightly, gesturing vaguely around the small, elegant ballroom Lydia had chosen for the reception. "It's lovely, but perhaps a little too much for you now, all alone. You know, the market is quite good for properties in this area." My heart gave a little lurch. He knew nothing of the house's true value, the small, quiet treasure it was. But his questions felt leading, too pointed for polite conversation at a wedding. I feigned a gentle, almost wistful smile. "Oh, Mark, dear. This old house and I, we're like two old friends. We understand each other. And besides," I chuckled softly, "what little Robert left me is barely enough to keep the roof from leaking, let alone consider moving to some fancy new place." I gave a delicate, dismissive wave of my hand, perfecting the act of the slightly dotty, financially struggling widow. One lives frugally in one's golden years, you know. He smiled, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, but he dropped the subject. He was good, I granted him that. He didn't press. But the seed of suspicion he had inadvertently planted had already taken root in my mind. Later, as the evening wore on and the champagne flowed more freely, I witnessed a small incident that solidified my unease. A young waiter, perhaps new to the job, accidentally spilled a tray of drinks, narrowly missing Lydia's pristine white dress. He was profusely apologetic, flustered, and embarrassed. Lydia, ever gracious, simply laughed it off, assuring him it was no harm done. But Mark, who had been chatting animatedly with a group of friends, turned on the poor boy with an unexpected, almost violent snap. His voice, though kept low, was laced with an icy menace. "Watch what you're doing, you imbecile. Do you have any idea how much this evening costs? Be more careful next time, or you'll find yourself out of a job." The waiter blanched and practically fled. The friends Mark had been speaking to looked momentarily uncomfortable, and even Lydia's bright smile faltered for a second, a shadow passing over her features. Mark quickly composed himself, turning back to his conversation with a charming, apologetic shrug. "Some people just can't handle pressure," he quipped, and the moment passed for everyone else. But not for me. I saw the raw, unmasked flash of anger in his eyes, the almost instantaneous shift from polished charm to cold cruelty. It was a predator's instinct, quickly veiled, but unmistakable. He had revealed himself, if only for a fleeting second. And in that moment, my decision to keep Robert's inheritance a secret felt not just justified, but absolutely vital. My quiet life might have been a mask for my own private grief, but I was beginning to suspect that Mark's polished charm was a mask for something far more sinister. The celebration continued around me, a symphony of false gaiety, but all I could hear was the growing dissonance of my fears. The quiet had been shattered, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the storm was coming. The days following the wedding settled into a deceptive calm. The last lingering scent of lilies faded from the house, replaced by the familiar aroma of my freshly brewed chamomile tea. I resumed my quiet routine, tending to my small herb garden, reading through Robert's old history books, volumes filled with his cryptic marginalia, and, perhaps most importantly, discreetly beginning my own quiet investigation into Mark. I wasn't a detective, not by any stretch of the imagination. But I was an observer, and I had Google. The internet, a marvel I still hadn't quite mastered but understood the power of, yielded surprisingly little on Mark Harrison. A few generic LinkedIn profiles, a couple of fleeting mentions in local real estate circulars. Nothing that screamed scoundrel, but nothing that whispered pillar of the community either. It was the very blandness that unsettled me, the lack of any real depth or history beyond a carefully curated facade. It was as if he had only truly begun to exist the day he met Lydia. I tried to push my anxieties aside, telling myself I was being an overly protective mother, an old woman too set in her ways to embrace new happiness for her daughter. Lydia called, her voice bubbly and full of newlywed bliss, describing their plans for a small getaway. "Mark is just wonderful, Mama," she'd gushed. "So thoughtful, so caring. He makes me feel like a queen." My heart ached for her, for the sincerity in her voice. I hoped with every fiber of my being that my instincts were wrong, that my suspicion was merely the lingering shadow of grief, distorting my perception. Then came the knock. It wasn't the gentle, familiar tap of a neighbor or the robust rap of a delivery person. It was a firm, deliberate series of 3 knocks, echoing through the quiet afternoon. I glanced at the clock on the mantelpiece, precisely 2:17 p.m. Too early for Lydia, too late for most errands. A shiver, cold and unwelcome, traced its way down my spine. I opened the door a crack, peering out from behind the heavy oak. My breath hitched. On my porch, impeccably dressed and radiating a practiced air of authority, stood Mark. And beside him, a tall, severe-looking woman in a dark suit, clutching a leather briefcases. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, met mine instantly. "Eleonora," Mark began, his smile, for once, not quite reaching his eyes. It was a tight, almost strained affair. "So good to see you again. I apologize for the unannounced visit, but this is Ms. Eleanor Vance, my attorney. We need to have a word." My mind raced, 1,000 thoughts colliding in an instant. My secret. My money. His sudden visit. The lawyer. It was all connected. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of alarm. But years of experience, of learning to mask my true feelings, kicked in. I straightened my posture, a polite, slightly confused expression settling on my face. "Oh, dear," I said, my voice a little higher than usual, laced with the feigned frailty of an old woman. An attorney? Goodness, I hope everything is all right. Do come in, you two. I stepped aside, opening the door wider, ushering them into my pristine, chintz-filled living room. It was an exercise in strategic vulnerability, inviting them into my domain, but presenting myself as harmless. They settled onto the edge of my antique sofa, Ms. Vance placing her briefcase carefully on the polished coffee table. The air crackled with a sterile formality that felt utterly alien in my cozy home. "Mrs. Vanderbilt," Ms. Vance began, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. "We're here today representing Mr. Mark Harrison and, by extension, your daughter, Lydia Harrison, concerning certain outstanding matters pertaining to the estate of your late husband, Robert Vanderbilt." My mind whirled. Outstanding matters? Robert's official will had been clear, simple. A modest sum, the house, the car. Nothing more. This was about the money. They knew. Or, at least, they suspected. I feigned a bewildered frown. Robert's estate? Oh, but that was all settled ages ago, dear. Just a small pension and this old house. Nothing to trouble yourselves with, I assure you. I offered them a wavering, almost apologetic smile. Are you quite sure you have the right Mrs. Vanderbilt? Mark interjected, his voice still smooth, but with an underlying edge I hadn't heard before. Eleonora, we understand your modesty. But my team has been doing some research. Robert was a very astute man. And there are whispers. Suggestions of rather significant hidden assets. Assets that, legally, belong not just to you, but also to Lydia as his sole heir, and now, through marriage, to me. He said me, with a possessiveness that sent a fresh wave of icy dread through me. He wasn't even pretending to care about Lydia's well-being, it was about his claim. My carefully constructed world, my sanctuary, felt suddenly invaded, threatened. The silence I had so diligently kept was now under siege. My sweet, quiet life was over. The game had begun, and I realized, with a chilling clarity, that I was no longer merely a gentle old lady. I was a guardian, a protector, and, if necessary, a predator, defending her territory from an encroaching threat. The quiet war had officially been declared, right here on my own doorstep. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp, like shards of glass. And now, through marriage to me. Mark's pronouncement of ownership, cold and unapologetic, sliced through my feigned innocence. My facade, however, remained intact, a brittle shield against the escalating tension. Inside, a frantic orchestra played, a cacophony of fear, anger, and a surprising surge of defiance. They were here. They knew something. Not the full truth, perhaps, but enough to set the hounds loose. Hidden assets? I repeated, my voice still trembling slightly, but now with a subtle undertone of genuine incredulity, not just a performance. Mark, dear, I assure you, if Robert had any hidden assets, he kept them hidden even from his wife of 50 years. He was a sentimental man, not a secretive magnate. I gave a small, disarming laugh, as if the very idea was preposterous. Are you implying my husband was dishonest? Ms. Vance, the attorney, interjected with a steely gaze. Mrs. Vanderbilt, we are not making accusations. We are merely presenting information that suggests a discrepancy between the declared estate and certain financial activities linked to Mr. Robert Vanderbilt. Our concern is ensuring all rightful beneficiaries receive their due. Rightful beneficiaries, I mused, letting the words roll around my tongue. Rightful was a subjective term, especially when $75 million were at stake. And who, pray tell, might these beneficiaries be, other than myself and, of course, Lydia? I asked, looking pointedly at Mark. He shifted uncomfortably, a fleeting shadow of impatience crossing his face before he smoothed it away. Well, naturally, Lydia is the primary concern. And as her husband, I'm simply ensuring her financial security, Eleonora. You understand, of course. We just want to get to the bottom of this. Transparency, you know. Transparency. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. His version of transparency meant stripping me bare. My mind, usually so placid, was now a vortex of strategy. I couldn't betray my hand. Not yet. I needed time. I needed information. Most importantly, I needed an ally. I see, I said, a slow, thoughtful nod. Well, I suppose it's only natural for a newlywed husband to be concerned for his wife's future. Though I confess, I'm rather baffled by all this. Perhaps I should speak with my own solicitor. He handled Robert's will, a very straightforward affair, as I recall. I paused, letting my gaze drift vaguely out the window. Such a lot of bother over nothing, really. Ms. Vance's eyes narrowed. Mrs. Vanderbilt, we would prefer to resolve this amicably, directly. Bringing in additional legal counsel would only complicate matters and increase costs. Oh, but dear, I replied, a touch of gentle reproach in my tone. My dear late husband always said it was best to have everything proper and above board. I wouldn't dream of discussing such complicated matters without professional guidance, especially if it involves his memory. I patted the arm of my chair. You must understand an old woman's sentimentalities. Mark clearly wanted to push, to bully, to intimidate. I saw it in the twitch of his jaw. But Ms. Vance, sensing a potential legal quagmire, held up a hand. Very well, Mrs. Vanderbilt. We can arrange another meeting once you've consulted with your counsel. We will be in touch. The departure was swift, punctuated by the sharp click of the briefcase and the purposeful stride of Ms. Vance's heels. Mark gave me another one of his practiced smiles, but this time, it held a distinctly predatory edge. We'll be looking forward to that, Eleonora. The moment the door closed behind them, the strength that had buoyed me evaporated. My knees felt weak, and I sank back into the armchair, my heart still thudding against my ribs. This wasn't just about money, it was about control, about power. And they were playing dirty. But so would I. My first thought was Arthur. Arthur Stone. A name that conjured images of oak-paneled courtrooms, shrewd intellect, and an unwavering moral compass. He had been Robert's closest friend, a brilliant judge who had retired years ago but still took on a select few, immensely complex cases as a private counsel. He was a man of integrity, utterly discreet, and, most importantly, he had known Robert. He would understand the nuances, the unspoken histories. I reached for the antique rotary phone, my fingers fumbling slightly with the numbers. Arthur's number, memorized decades ago, still came easily. A familiar, gravelly voice answered on the third ring. Stone residence, Arthur said. Arthur, it's Eleonora, I whispered, my voice still trembling a little. A beat of silence, then his voice, softer, concerned. Eleonora? My dear, what's wrong? You sound troubled. Troubled is an understatement. Old friend, I replied, taking a deep breath, marshaling my thoughts. I believe I've just been served notice in a game of cat and mouse. And I have a feeling the stakes are rather high. I need your help, Arthur. I need to tell you everything. The game had indeed begun. But they had underestimated their opponent. They saw an old woman. They didn't see the lioness that still roared within. Arthur Stone's office was a comforting anachronism, a dimly lit sanctuary filled with the scent of aged leather and pipe tobacco, shelves overflowing with legal tomes, and a worn Chesterfield sofa that had absorbed countless tales of human folly and triumph. He listened, his keen, intelligent eyes fixed on me, as I recounted the entire story, Robert's secret fortune, my intuitive decision to keep it hidden, Mark's unsettling charm, the wedding incident, and finally, the audacious visit from Mark and his lawyer. When I finished, the silence in the room stretched, punctuated only by the soft tick of an old grandfather clock. Arthur leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful frown creasing his brow. $75 million, he murmured, almost to himself. Robert, you sly old fox. And to think, he never breathed a word. He looked at me, a glimmer of admiration in his gaze. Your instincts, Eleonora, have always been remarkably sharp. You were right to be cautious. His words were a balm to my raw nerves. But how did they know Arthur? Or how did they suspect enough to bring in an attorney? Arthur steepled his fingers. Mark is a predator. He married your daughter for a reason, and it wasn't just her charming personality, I dare say. He likely did his homework. Robert Vanderbilt wasn't a nobody. Even if his public financial profile was modest, there would have been whispers in certain circles. Unofficial rumors, perhaps, about his luck or his unconventional investments. Enough for someone like Mark, with the right connections, to start digging. He paused, then added, and a man like Robert, who amassed such a fortune in secret, usually leaves a trail, however faint. That was our starting point. Arthur, with his vast network and legal prowess, began a deep dive into Robert's financial history, beyond the official, public records. He reached out to old contacts, forensic accountants, and even a few retired investigators known for their discretion. He promised me he would leave no stone unturned, but warned that such secrets, especially those so carefully guarded by Robert, would not yield easily. Meanwhile, I began my own, more personal investigation. My battlefield was my home, specifically Robert's study, a room I had mostly left untouched since his death, a mausoleum of his intellect. I began to sift through his belongings, not for sentimental reasons now, but with the ruthless precision of a scavenger. His old desk, a sprawling oak beast, held a myriad of hidden compartments. In one, behind a false back, I found a small, leather-bound journal. It wasn't a diary. It was filled with cryptic notations, what looked like coded financial figures, names I didn't recognize, and precise dates stretching back decades. There were also old, faded maps, not of any local area, but of remote, exotic locales. The Congo, the Amazon, Siberia. My Robert, my quiet, history-loving husband, had indeed led a double life. The realization was both disorienting and exhilarating. He wasn't just an investor. He was involved in something far grander, far more clandestine than I could have ever imagined. The $75 million was just the tip of an iceberg, the visible manifestation of a life lived on the fringes of the known. These weren't ordinary investments. They felt like the spoils of high-stakes, dangerous ventures. My understanding of Robert, of our entire shared history, began to fracture and reassemble itself into a more complex, thrilling, and, frankly, terrifying mosaic. As Arthur and I delved deeper, the tension at home, or rather, between me and my daughter, began to escalate. Lydia, caught in the middle of this nascent conflict, was becoming increasingly agitated. Mark, I could tell, was masterfully manipulating her, playing on her naive loyalty and her innate desire for harmony. "Mama, why won't you just talk to Mark's lawyer?" She'd plead over the phone, her voice laced with a frustration that pained me. "He's just trying to understand, to make sure everything is fair. He thinks you're hiding something." "Your husband's lawyer is making rather baseless accusations, dear," I'd reply, trying to keep my voice calm, maternal. "And I don't appreciate being interrogated in my own home." "There's nothing to hide, Lydia. Just the modest estate your father left, as you well know. But Mark says, he says Dad was a very clever man, that he might have had investments you didn't even know about, for your good. And now you're just being stubborn, Mama. It looks like you don't trust us." The implied accusation stung. She was turning against me. Mark was slowly, meticulously driving a wedge between us, painting me as the obstinate, perhaps even selfish, old woman clinging to phantom riches. It broke my heart, but my resolve hardened. If she couldn't see his true colors now, she would eventually. And when that day came, she would need me and, perhaps, the protection this secret fortune could offer. One evening, after another strained phone call with Lydia, I found myself staring at Robert's old globe, my finger tracing the same lines he must have traced. My thoughts were a turbulent storm of grief for my fractured relationship with my daughter and a growing, potent anger towards Mark. He was not just after money, he was after my peace, my family, my legacy. The quiet, gentle Eleonora was receding, replaced by something sharper, more resilient. The lioness was not just awakening, she was beginning to scent her prey. And the chase, I knew, was just beginning. The phone call from Arthur came late one evening, cutting through the usual silence of my home. His voice, normally so calm, held a clipped urgency. "Eleonora, I've found something. Or rather, someone." He explained that one of his contacts had located Mark Harrison's ex-wife, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, living a quiet life in a small town upstate. It had taken considerable effort and a discreet inquiry, but Sarah had finally agreed to speak. Her story, as relayed by Arthur, was a chilling confirmation of my darkest suspicions. Mark Harrison was not just a charmer with a knack for real estate. He was a professional con artist, a manipulator who preyed on vulnerable women with inherited wealth or promising family connections. Sarah, a kind but somewhat naive woman, had inherited a modest sum from her own mother. Mark had swept her off her feet, convinced her to invest in a series of guaranteed profitable ventures that miraculously always failed, leaving her financially destitute. He had accrued significant gambling debts, using her money to fuel his addiction, before eventually abandoning her for a wealthier prospect. His charm, his attention, his entire persona was a meticulously constructed trap. He was a man with no conscience, only an insatiable hunger for money and control. "He's a chameleon," Eleonora, Arthur had said, his voice grim. "He adapts to his prey, becomes whatever they need him to be. And then he squeezes them dry." The revelation, while not entirely surprising, hit me with a cold, hard force. Lydia. My sweet, trusting Lydia, caught in the web of a truly dangerous man. My heart ached, a deep, maternal pain. But alongside it, a fierce, protective rage began to simmer. This was no longer just about preserving Robert's secret or securing my own peace. It was about saving my daughter. Mark, sensing that my stubbornness wasn't simply an old woman's eccentricity, grew bolder. The polite inquiry ceased. Instead, the threats began. First, it was subtle. A registered letter from Ms. Vance detailing potential legal action for obstruction of justice and fraudulent concealment of assets. It was boilerplate, designed to intimidate, but it served its purpose of ratcheting up the pressure. Then, things escalated. My car, a reliable old sedan, suddenly developed brake trouble. A mechanic I trusted found that a vital brake line had been deliberately tampered with, cut almost to the point of failure. "A few more trips, Mrs. Vanderbilt," he'd said, shaking his head, "and you wouldn't have been so lucky." My blood ran cold. Was it a warning? Or something more sinister? A few nights later, I woke to a strange noise downstairs. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. My heart hammered. I lay perfectly still, listening, my hand reaching for the heavy brass lamp beside my bed. The house, usually so comforting, now felt like a fragile shell. The footsteps receded, and by morning, there was no sign of forced entry, nothing stolen. But a single, wilting lily, a flower of death, lay on my pristine kitchen counter. A clear message. He was in my house. He was watching. He was capable of anything. The quiet, introspective Eleonora, who had spent years mourning and rebuilding, was gone. In her place was a woman forged in fire, stripped of sentimentality, and filled with a cold, steely resolve. My hands, which had once knitted intricate patterns, now trembled with a different kind of energy, a fierce determination. I had played the role of the frail old woman long enough. Mark saw me as a weak obstacle. He would learn, soon enough, that he had gravely miscalculated. My tactics shifted. I began to speak to Arthur not just about legal defense, but about offense. "We need to expose him, Arthur," I stated, my voice firm, devoid of its former tremor. "Not just for the money, but for Lydia's life. He will ruin her, just as he ruined Sarah." Arthur looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, quickly replaced by a nod of approval. "I understand, Eleonora. What do you have in mind?" I looked around Robert's study, at the coded journal, the strange maps. Robert always had a flair for the dramatic, a love for puzzles. "I think it's time we gave Mark a puzzle of his own. One designed to lead him exactly where we want him to go." My husband, the man who had loved enigmas, had left behind not just a fortune, but a dangerous, intricate game. And I, his seemingly ordinary wife, was finally ready to play. The hunter had become the hunted, but this old woman, with her quiet strength and sharpening wit, was about to become the most dangerous player on the board. The wilting lily on my kitchen counter had been the final straw. It was not merely a threat, it was a violation, a physical invasion of my sanctuary. The fear, for a fleeting moment, had been paralyzing. But then it transmuted into something cold and solid, clarity. Mark was not just a greedy schemer, he was dangerous, unhinged, and utterly without scruples. And he had underestimated me. He saw an old woman, a victim. He didn't see the silent strategist, the one who had navigated Robert's eccentricities for 50 years, the one who understood that the quietest waters often ran the deepest. My living room, usually a place of gentle contemplation, became my war room. I spread out Robert's cryptic journal, the old maps, the bewildering collection of numbers and names. Arthur joined me, his presence a comforting anchor in the gathering storm. He was a man of logic, but he respected intuition, especially mine. He thinks I'm a simple mark, Arthur, I stated, my voice steady, my gaze fixed on a faded photograph of Robert, his eyes twinkling with a mischievous intelligence. He believes I'm easily intimidated, easily manipulated. We will use that against him. Arthur raised an eyebrow. And how do we do that, Eleonora? He's proven he's willing to cross lines. By giving him what he thinks he wants, I replied, a slow, calculated smile touching my lips. A piece of the pie. A tantalizing, seemingly attainable piece. Enough to make him drop his guard, to become sloppy. My plan began to form, intricate and delicate like one of my lace doilies, but with a steel thread running through its core. I would create a trail, a series of carefully planted clues suggesting a smaller, more accessible portion of Robert's fortune was hidden somewhere, perhaps in an old safety deposit box or a forgotten bank account, designed to be discovered only after my demise. Mark, driven by his insatiable greed, would surely bite. The challenge lay in making it believable, in weaving a lie so close to the truth that he wouldn't question it. Robert, with his penchant for puzzles and his desire for secrecy, had unwittingly provided the perfect template. We would use his own methods against Mark. Arthur, though initially skeptical, quickly caught on to the psychological finesse of the plan. So, you're baiting the trap with a smaller catch, hoping he'll reveal himself in his eagerness for the bigger one? Precisely, I confirmed. He is too impatient, too arrogant to believe there might be more. He will focus on the immediate, tangible prize. And in doing so, he will make mistakes. As we worked, poring over Robert's journal, Arthur began to uncover more of Robert's past. It wasn't just investments, it was a complex network of associations. Robert, it turned out, had spent a significant part of his younger life involved with a private, extremely discreet organization. They dealt in assets. Not just financial ones, but historical artifacts, rare documents, and specialized intelligence. They operated in the gray areas of international law, always maintaining a veneer of legality, but with methods that were undeniably unconventional, even dangerous. The $75 million wasn't just his fortune, it was his severance, his retirement package from this shadowy entity, ensuring his silence and their continued discretion. The money was a golden cage, keeping him quiet. This is far more complicated than I imagined, Eleonora, Arthur admitted, tracing a finger over a coded entry in Robert's journal that mentioned a black lotus and a specific date. This organization values its anonymity above all else. If they learn Mark is digging into Robert's affairs, they might see him as a liability. And they wouldn't hesitate to remove a liability. The implications were chilling. Mark wasn't just fighting an old woman, he was unknowingly poking a sleeping dragon. This added a new, terrifying layer of urgency to our plan. We needed to deal with Mark quickly, before his blundering exposed Robert's, and now my, connection to this formidable force. A few days later, Mark called. His voice, stripped of its former false charm, was now overtly menacing. Eleonora, this is getting ridiculous. Lydia is upset. I'm upset. We know you're hiding something. Stop playing games. My heart pounded, but I kept my voice calm, almost sweet. Oh, Mark, dear, I assure you, I'm not playing games. Just trying to understand all these complicated legal terms. My lawyer, Arthur Stone, he's been so helpful. He's looking into everything. Perhaps he'll even find those hidden assets you're so convinced exist. I let a hint of sarcasm lace my words, a subtle challenge. There was a moment of silence on the other end, a beat where I could almost hear his mind working, processing my subtle defiance. Then, his voice, low and dangerous, just make sure he finds what he's looking for, Eleonora. Because if he doesn't, I will. And you won't like the consequences. The line clicked dead. I smiled, a cold, predatory smile that hadn't graced my lips in decades. He was agitated. He was reacting. The trap was being laid. The chess pieces were moving, and Mark, in his arrogance, didn't even realize he was already 2 moves behind. This was no longer just a legal battle or a family squabble. This was a battle of wits, a dangerous game of the mind, and I was determined to win. The scent of freshly baked apple pie, usually a comforting aroma in my home, felt almost sacrilegious as I meticulously placed a carefully aged, leather-bound ledger on Robert's desk. It was a forgery, a brilliant piece of deception crafted by Arthur's discreet contacts, designed to look exactly like the kind of obscure, personal record Robert might have kept. Inside, amidst pages of seemingly innocuous personal expenses, were scattered entries hinting at a modest, yet significant sum, perhaps $1 million or $2 million, hidden in an old, forgotten safe deposit box, a nest egg for a rainy day. Mentioned in a cryptic note. A small, tantalizing piece of the real pie. It needs to look like I stumbled upon it, I explained to Arthur, watching him examine the ledger. An accidental discovery, something an old woman might find while tidying up her late husband's things. Arthur nodded, a flicker of something akin to admiration in his eyes. He'll bite. It's just enough to feel like a victory without being overwhelming. And it will appeal to his ego, making him believe he outsmarted you. Our plan was in motion. I accidentally left the study door ajar one afternoon, a new habit I had developed since Mark's initial visit, when I suspected he might have been in my house. I made sure to leave the ledger in a prominent, yet not too obvious, spot on the desk, partially obscured by a stack of old magazines. Then I retreated to the kitchen, feigning a busy afternoon of baking, listening intently. Sure enough, within an hour, I heard the faint click of the front door. Not a knock, but the soft, deliberate sound of a key turning. He no longer bothered with civility. I held my breath, the rolling pin paused midair. Footsteps, stealthy but confident, moved through the hallway, heading straight for the study. A muffled rustle, a triumphant, almost inaudible sigh. I allowed myself a small, grim smile. He had taken the bait. The true challenge, however, was Lydia. She was still caught in Mark's carefully woven web, her loyalty torn, her trust eroded. The emotional toll of her growing alienation was immense, a silent ache in my chest. But I knew, with a mother's fierce certainty, that she needed to see Mark for who he truly was, to break free from his grasp. She couldn't hear it from me, she had to witness it herself. Providence, or perhaps just cruel timing, delivered the opportunity. Lydia, worried sick about the escalating tension, decided to pay an unannounced visit. She arrived moments after Mark had, unknowingly, pocketed the fake ledger and slipped out. "Mama? Are you all right?" she called out, her voice tight with concern as she found me in the kitchen, pretending to be absorbed in my baking. "I tried calling, but you didn't pick up. And your front door was unlocked." I turned, feigning a start. "Oh, Lydia, dear. What a lovely surprise. I must have been so engrossed. And the door, well, an old woman's forgetfulness, I suppose." I tried to sound light-hearted, but the weariness in my voice betrayed me. Before Lydia could press further, the phone rang. It was Mark, his voice booming with a false bravado I could hear even from where Lydia stood. "Eleonora, I was just calling to check on you. I was nearby, thought I'd pop in, but you must have been out. I hope everything's all right." My eyes met Lydia's. She heard the forced cheerfulness, the transparent lie. The air in the kitchen thickened with unspoken understanding. Her brow furrowed. "Mark called? But I just saw him leaving your house, Mama. He was carrying something." My heart gave a triumphant lurch. Finally. I kept my voice even. "Did you, dear?" "Well, perhaps he was just checking on me. He worries, you know. He's a good husband." I left the statement hanging, letting the irony sink in. Lydia said nothing, but a flicker of doubt, sharp and agonizing, passed through her eyes. The seed of suspicion I had carefully tried to plant had finally begun to sprout. But then another, more ominous layer was added to our dangerous game. Arthur called me the next morning, his voice hushed. "Eleonora, the organization, they know. About Mark's digging. They're concerned. Very concerned. How concerned? I asked, a cold dread coiling in my stomach. Enough to send a message, Arthur replied. One of Mark's business associates, a man he owes money to from his gambling days, was found with a broken leg and a warning. Back off from the Vanderbilt estate. And the warning mentioned your name, Eleonora. They believe Mark is a loose cannon, threatening their carefully guarded secrecy. The stakes had just become terrifyingly real. Mark wasn't just gambling with my money, he was gambling with his life, and potentially mine. The organization Robert had been involved with was not one to be trifled with. They were a silent, brutal force, and their entry into our conflict meant that failure was no longer an option. Mark, oblivious to the deeper forces he had unwittingly awakened, grew more reckless. He believed he had found his lead, his small jackpot. He began to apply more direct pressure, demanding the release of the assets from the supposed safe deposit box. His false charm evaporated completely, replaced by open impatience and veiled threats. He was so close, he thought, to his million-dollar prize. But he was walking into a trap, meticulously set, one that would expose not only his greed, but perhaps even his life to the perilous shadows of Robert's true legacy. The climax was upon us. The air in the old, ornate bank vault felt heavy, almost suffocating, thick with the scent of old paper and dust. I stood beside Arthur, my posture ramrod straight, my heart a frantic hummingbird in my chest. Opposite us, Mark fidgeted, his usual polished veneer cracking under the strain of his barely contained greed. Ms. Vance, his attorney, maintained her professional impassivity, but even she seemed to exude a subtle tension. Mark believed he was on the cusp of his victory. The fake ledger, carefully planted and then discovered, had led him directly to this moment. We had chosen a small, obscure bank in a quiet part of town, one where Robert had indeed held a legitimate, albeit minor, safe deposit box for decades. It was the perfect stage for our carefully orchestrated play. "Are we quite ready, Mrs. Vanderbilt?" Ms. Vance inquired, her voice cutting through the silence. "Mr. Harrison is eager to finalize these outstanding matters." "Oh, quite ready, dear," I replied, a sweet, almost childlike smile on my lips. Just so much fuss over such a small sum, really. But Robert was always one for proper procedure. The bank manager, a nervous, bespectacled man, fumbled with the keys. The heavy steel door of the safe deposit box whirred open with a theatrical groan. Mark leaned forward, his eyes alight with avarice, practically salivating at the thought of his immediate payday. Inside, nestled amongst seemingly worthless bundles of old letters and outdated stock certificates, was a single, plain brown envelope. Mark snatched it, his fingers almost tearing the paper in his haste. He pulled out a stack of documents, official-looking papers, indeed, but not what he expected. Not a check, not bond certificates, but a collection of meticulously notarized statements, dated years apart, each outlining a specific, irrevocable trust. Trusts established by Robert Vanderbilt. The first trust was for Lydia, a substantial sum, but with stringent conditions, access only upon reaching the age of 50, and only if she presented evidence of stable, independent employment and a prenuptial agreement that protected her assets. The second, a smaller one, was for various obscure charities Robert supported. And the third was the truly cruel twist of the knife, designed by Robert with a devilish foresight. It stipulated that if any individual, other than Eleonora Vanderbilt, attempted to lay claim to Robert's hidden assets without her explicit consent, a punitive clause would be activated, diverting a significant portion of their own assets to a legal fund to protect Eleonora. It was a poison pill, crafted by a man who had clearly anticipated future skirmishes. Mark's face, initially flushed with anticipation, turned ashen. He reread the documents, his eyes darting back and forth, the color draining from his cheeks. "What is this?" he snarled, crumpling the papers in his fist. This isn't what I was led to believe. This is a trick. A trick, dear." I feigned innocent surprise, my voice still light. "But these are indeed Robert's documents. He was a very thorough man, you know. Always thinking ahead." Suddenly, the door to the vault creaked open again. My heart leaped. It wasn't Lydia. It was two large, impeccably dressed men, their faces impassive, their eyes cold and watchful. They were not from the bank. Arthur subtly stiffened beside me. The organization had arrived. They hadn't come for me. They had come for Mark, a loose cannon who was attracting too much attention to Robert's carefully buried secrets. One of the men stepped forward, his voice a low rumble. "Mr. Harrison, we understand you have some unresolved business. Our employers are concerned about the noise you're making." His gaze flickered to Ms. Vance, a silent warning. Discretion is paramount. Mark, for the first time, looked genuinely terrified. He understood. He had not only failed to secure his imagined fortune, but he had also inadvertently drawn the attention of a far more dangerous entity than he could have ever conceived. His schemes, his petty manipulations, now seemed utterly insignificant in the face of this silent, formidable power. And then, just as Mark's bravado completely crumbled, the truly unexpected happened. Lydia walked in. She hadn't been able to shake her suspicion after the phone call, after seeing Mark leave my house with something hidden. She had followed me. She looked from Mark, pale and trembling, to the two imposing men, then to me, her face a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Her eyes fell on the crumpled documents still clutched in Mark's hand. "Mark," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What's going on here? Who are these men? And what have you done to Mama?" Mark, cornered, his game irrevocably exposed, turned on her. All pretense, all charm, all love evaporated. "Shut up, Lydia. You're useless. Your mother has been hiding money, a fortune, and she's playing games. We could have had it all, but no, she's a selfish old hag." His words, laced with venom and desperation, shattered the last vestiges of her naive trust. Lydia's face crumpled. The shock, the betrayal, the brutal honesty of his words hit her with the force of a physical blow. She saw him, truly saw him, for the first time. Not the charming husband, but the ruthless, greedy opportunist. The pieces clicked into place, his constant questioning about my finances, his growing impatience, his anger. You used me," she choked out, her voice breaking. "You never loved me, did you? You only wanted this." She gestured vaguely at the scene, the documents, the menacing figures. My heart ached for her, but there was also a fierce pride. She had seen the truth. She was finally free. Ms. Vance, sensing the complete collapse of her client's position and the dangerous new players in the room, quickly distanced herself. "Mr. Harrison, I believe our representation ends here. You have compromised our position and acted against advice." The two men from the organization stepped forward, their movement swift and decisive. They didn't touch Mark, but their presence alone was enough. "We suggest you reconsider your current trajectory, Mr. Harrison," one of them said, his voice quiet but utterly chilling. "And ensure no further noise is made concerning the Vanderbilt estate. For your own well-being." Mark, beaten, exposed, and utterly terrified, could only nod, his eyes wide with a fear I hadn't seen in him before. His hunt for my phantom millions had led him not to riches, but to ruin. My trap had worked. The predator was ensnared. The silence that followed Mark's humiliating exit from the bank vault was profound, broken only by Lydia's quiet sobs. The two men from the organization had vanished as silently as they had appeared, leaving behind a chilling sense of their omnipresent power. Ms. Vance, with a curt nod, had followed them, undoubtedly keen to distance herself from a client who had so thoroughly self-destructed. I moved to Lydia, enveloping her in my arms. Her body trembled, racked by a mixture of shock, betrayal, and a profound, aching sorrow. She wept into my shoulder, not the tears of a child, but the wrenching sobs of a woman whose carefully constructed world had just imploded. "Mama," she choked out, I can't believe it. He said those things. To me. To you." "I know, my love," I murmured, stroking her hair. "I know. There was no need for explanations, no need for 'I told you so.' The truth, delivered by Mark himself, had been brutal but effective. She had seen him unmasked, stripped of his facade, a truly ugly truth laid bare. Arthur, ever the steady presence, quietly handled the bank formalities. The fake ledger and the trust documents were carefully put away, the deception maintained, at least for now. He understood the delicacy of the situation, the emotional wreckage, and the continuing threat that Robert's secret and the organization it attracted still posed. In the days that followed, Lydia retreated into herself. She moved back into my house, seeking the familiar comfort and quiet solace she had once taken for granted. The initial shock gave way to a simmering anger, then a deep, debilitating grief for the love she thought she had found. It was a painful, necessary process of disillusionment, a stripping away of her naivety. I let her grieve, offering silent comfort, warm meals, and the unwavering presence of a mother's love. We talked, sometimes for hours, sometimes in comfortable silence. She slowly began to understand my caution, my secrecy, seeing it not as a betrayal, but as a desperate act of protection. "You knew, didn't you, Mama?" she asked one evening, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. "About him?" I nodded gently. "My instincts rarely fail me, dear. And your father, he taught me a thing or two about reading people. And about keeping secrets." The conversation then turned to Robert, and for the first time, I felt ready to share parts of his truth with Lydia. I showed her the coded journal, the maps, the hints of his clandestine past. I explained the organization, not in intricate detail, but enough for her to grasp the magnitude of the world her father had moved in, and the reason for his vast, hidden fortune. She listened, her eyes wide with a new understanding, a new respect for the complexity of the man she had called father and the woman she called mother. As for Mark, the organization handled him discreetly, efficiently, and with terrifying finality. News filtered through the local gossip mill of a businessman who had suddenly vanished, leaving behind a trail of mounting debts and broken promises. There were no police reports, no public outcry. Just a sudden, complete erasure. It was a chilling testament to the power of the shadow world Robert had inhabited, and a stark reminder that some secrets were best left buried. My silence, it turned out, had not only saved me, but had also, inadvertently, saved Mark from a much worse fate than even his own greed could orchestrate. The real $75 million, which remained securely hidden, was a complex matter. With Arthur's guidance, I began to restructure Robert's genuine trusts. A significant portion was indeed earmarked for Lydia, but with far more robust protections, establishing a generational trust managed by independent trustees, ensuring she could never be exploited again, and that the wealth would be used for good, not for personal indulgence or the schemes of predators. Another large sum was quietly channeled into various foundations supporting education and environmental causes, the quiet acts of benevolence Robert himself had often championed, albeit anonymously. I kept a comfortable sum for myself, not for lavish living, but as a symbol of my hard-won independence and as a strategic reserve. The money was no longer a burden, but a tool, a silent weapon I had learned to wield. My quiet life had returned, but it was transformed. The old Eleonora, the gentle widow, had gone through the crucible and emerged stronger, wiser, and immeasurably more resilient. The relationship with Lydia was slowly, painstakingly rebuilding, forged in the fires of shared trauma and newly discovered truths. It was a deeper, more honest connection now, free of naive expectations and unspoken resentments. She saw me not just as her mother, but as a formidable woman, a protector, a survivor. And I saw her, not just as my vulnerable daughter, but as a woman capable of facing harsh truths and rebuilding her life with strength and grace. The fractured family was mending, piece by painful piece. The legacy, it turned out, was not just money, but a profound understanding of love, loyalty, and the hidden strengths that lie within us all. The autumn leaves outside my window turned from vibrant gold to russet and then to a muted, elegant brown, mirroring the changes that had settled within me. The grand drama of Mark's unraveling, the chilling whispers of the organization, and the painstaking reconstruction of my relationship with Lydia had all receded, becoming threads in the rich tapestry of my past. My quiet life had returned, but it was not the same quiet. It was deeper, imbued with a newfound serenity that came from facing down a storm and emerging intact. I often found myself on the sun-drenched veranda, a cup of chamomile tea warming my hands, watching the squirrels chase each other up the ancient oak. The silence was no longer a void to be filled with grief, but a canvas for contemplation. I was no longer the frail, slightly forgetful widow Mark had perceived. The journey had stripped away the outer layers of my former self, revealing a core of steel I hadn't known I possessed. I had learned that strength wasn't about shouting, it was about knowing when to be silent, when to observe, and when to strike with quiet precision. Lydia was thriving. She had, with Arthur's help and a newfound determination, taken steps to rebuild her life. She enrolled in a local community college, pursuing a long-dormant passion for art history, and found a part-time job she genuinely enjoyed. The trust fund, now carefully structured, remained untouched, a secure foundation for her future, but not a crutch. She had learned to stand on her own, stronger and wiser for her ordeal. Our conversations were now open, honest, filled with a mutual respect that had deepened through shared adversity. She called often, not out of obligation, but out of genuine affection, sharing her small victories and seeking my quiet counsel. The distance that Mark had so cruelly tried to create had, paradoxically, brought us closer than ever before. Arthur, my steadfast ally, remained a presence in my life, a trusted friend whose dry wit and sharp intellect I now cherished more than ever. We would meet occasionally for tea, discussing books, politics, and the occasional cryptic case he was still involved with. He often remarked on my transformation. "You've bloomed, Eleonora," he'd said once, a twinkle in his eye. Robert would be immensely proud. And perhaps a little afraid. I chuckled, acknowledging the truth in his words. Robert. His memory was no longer shrouded in mystery and resentment, but in a profound, complex love. I understood him now, his need for secrecy, his elaborate preparations, his hidden layers. He had loved me fiercely, and in his own enigmatic way, he had protected me even from beyond the grave. The $75 million, which had once felt like a strange, unsettling burden, was now simply a testament to his complex life and to my own unexpected journey. It wasn't about the money itself, but what it represented, the strength to adapt, the wisdom to discern, and the courage to protect what mattered most. One afternoon, I sat on my veranda, the golden light of the setting sun bathing the garden in a soft glow. In my hand, I held an old, slightly frayed photograph of Robert. He was younger in the picture, his arm around me, a familiar, knowing smirk playing on his lips, his eyes sparkling with that characteristic mischievous intelligence. It was as if he was looking directly at me, through the veil of time, a silent chuckle escaping him. "I knew you'd handle it, my dear," his eyes seemed to say. I always knew. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak, carrying with it the faint, sweet scent of late-blooming roses. I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. I had walked through the fire, navigated the treacherous waters of deceit and danger, and emerged on the other side. My quiet life was no longer a mask, but a deeply earned peace. I knew that life, in its infinite wisdom, would always present new challenges, new mysteries, new shadows. But I was ready. I was Eleonora Vanderbilt, and I had learned that sometimes the loudest cry for help is a profound silence, and sometimes the most impenetrable shield is simply the wisdom of a quiet heart.